"You are fraudulent," Claudia Merrow said. Then she closed the Clear Ledger HealthPay audit binder before reading the first bank reconciliation. The room went silent. Jonas Bellwether, the chief financial officer, pushed his chair back. Renee Halston, the audit manager, stopped typing. Solomon Greer did not raise his voice. He only placed one hand on the folder in front of him and asked, "Which number is false?" Claudia leaned back. "Companies like yours always hide something." Solomon looked toward the glass wall, where junior auditors were pretending not to listen. "Are you sure you want that sentence in the meeting record?" Claudia smiled. A founder begging for an audit is not in a position to threaten the audit firm. Solomon closed his laptop. "1 hour from now, you will understand who is really being audited." Claudia thought the calm black founder had come to beg for credibility. She did not know his company had cleaner books than many public clients she protected. She did not know her own work papers had already been mapped, copied, and compared. She did not know the Securities and Exchange Commission had been waiting for one final live example of a larger pattern. When the emergency order arrived 60 minutes later, freezing certain firm-related accounts, sealing audit data, and suspending Merrow Kavanaugh from selected investor filings, the sentence she used to bury Solomon would become the first line investigators read. That morning, Merrow Kavanaugh looked like a place built to sell trust. The reception wall carried silver words about independence, integrity, and public accountability. Conference room 12 had a long table, a screen, a tray of untouched water bottles, and one audit binder thick enough to make a careful person curious. Claudia Merrow was not curious yet. That was the danger. Clear Ledger HealthPay was not an idea held together by a social mission and hopeful slides. It was a working financial technology company that helped community clinics, small medical practices, nonprofit patient funds, and low-income patients understand medical bills before those bills became a life sentence. The platform showed what a patient owed, why the charge existed, which insurer had paid, which fee was disputed, which repayment plan was fair, which clinic account had received the money, and which line of the ledger supported the answer. 3 years of revenue, real customer contracts, monthly bank reconciliation, escrow accounts separated from operating funds, refund liability tracked in its own ledger, customer payments matched to bank deposits, internal controls logged by user, time, source, and approval chain. Jonas had spent 2 weeks preparing the package. Every tab had an index, every schedule tied to a bank record, every material adjustment had a note and approval path. Solomon had insisted on that discipline for one reason. He knew what one wrong number could do. When Solomon was 15, his father, Isaac Greer, received a hospital bill that did not belong to him. A surgery adjustment was posted twice. A coverage payment was applied to the wrong account. A collection agency bought the wrong debt before the error was corrected. By the time the hospital admitted the mistake, the family credit had already been damaged. The small house was gone. The apology came in a letter that sounded cleaner than the harm it described. Isaac had folded that letter and placed it in a kitchen drawer. Then he told Solomon, "Son, a wrong number can rob a poor man faster than a thief." That sentence built Clear Ledger before Solomon ever wrote a business plan. A number had to leave a trail. A payment had to have a source. A dispute had to stay visible until resolved. A poor patient could not be forced to fight a shadow. At 8:42, Renee Halston entered conference room 12 with a tablet and a checklist. "Good morning," she said. Solomon stood. "Good morning." Jonas opened the first binder. "We prepared the revenue schedule, customer contract index, bank reconciliation package, deferred revenue schedule, escrow account detail, refund liability report, internal control log, and original payment processor exports." Renee looked at the tabs. "This is organized." Jonas answered, We prefer boring finance. Renee almost smiled. Boring is good in audit. Solomon watched her reaction carefully. He had come to Merrow Cavanagh for an audit, but not only for an audit. He had come because Merrow Cavanagh had become too important in the investor market. A clean opinion from that firm could make a company look safe. A quiet warning from that firm could make investors walk away before reading a single schedule. For months, Solomon had noticed strange patterns in companies Merrow Cavanagh had blessed. Revenue jumped just before funding rounds. Refund obligations moved into later periods. Vendor debt became strategic partner credit. Customer churn appeared in footnotes too soft to warn anyone. When Jonas compared several reports, he said, "This is not one mistake. This is a style." Solomon had not made public accusations. He had given the pattern to Selena Duarte, Clear Ledger counsel. Selena had carried it through the proper enforcement channel. That was how Solomon worked. Right evidence, right process, right record. So he entered the room with clean books and one quiet question. Would Merrow Cavanagh apply the same skepticism to his numbers that it avoided with richer clients? At 8:53, Claudia Merrow arrived. She did not apologize for being late. She did not ask Renee what she had reviewed. She did not open the reconciliation binder. She looked first at Solomon, then at Jonas, then at the slide showing Clear Ledger customers. Community clinics, small practices, patients on repayment plans, nonprofit medical assistance funds. Her face barely moved, but Solomon recognized the shift. Claudia had turned mission into suspicion before reading the numbers. "Mr. Greer," she said, "Miss Merrow." She sat at the head of the table. "Tell me why Clear Ledger needs our firm." "We are preparing for a major growth round. Our investors requested an independent audit from a recognized firm. We chose Merrow Cavanagh because of your work in financial technology and health payment systems." Claudia tapped the binder with one finger. "You serve low-income patients. We serve clinics that serve them. Small practices that lack sophisticated finance teams. Some do. That is why our platform creates clear controls." Claudia did not open the Controls tab. She looked at Jonas. "Your title?" "Chief Financial Officer. Background: public accounting, health systems finance, payment reconciliation, and internal control design." She looked back at Solomon. "And you?" "Founder and Chief Executive Officer. No elite accelerator. No banking sponsor. No founding team from the usual networks. No." Renee lowered her eyes. She knew the tone. Claudia used soft questions to build hard conclusions. Jonas said, "The company has 3 years of operating history and complete transaction-level data." Claudia replied, "We will get to that." But she did not. She asked whether community clinics could really pay on time. She asked whether patients understood repayment terms. She asked whether nonprofit funds delayed reimbursement. She asked whether Solomon used a social mission to inflate valuation. Each question sounded technical from a distance. Inside the room, each one carried the same message. Your customers are poor, so your revenue must be suspect. Solomon answered with records: average collection period, payment success rate, refund reserve, contract terms, clinic renewal rate, bank deposit match. Jonas opened schedules. Renee reviewed them. The numbers held. At 9:17, Renee said carefully, "The bank activity appears to tie to the revenue schedule." Claudia gave her a look. "Preliminary appearance is not conclusion." "Of course," Renee said. Jonas turned another page. "Here are the monthly reconciliations. Each payment batch has processor reports, bank confirmations, ledger entries, and approval history." Claudia did not touch the page. Instead, she looked at the old leather folder near Solomon's hand. "Is that part of the official package?" "No, personal notes." "From whom?" My father. Claudia smiled faintly. Founders often carry symbols into rooms where numbers should speak. Solomon met her eyes. Then let the numbers speak. For the first time, Claudia looked irritated. She was used to founders becoming eager when she sounded doubtful. Solomon did none of that. He waited. Waiting made Claudia reach for authority. Mr. Greer, our firm has to protect its reputation. So does mine. Your market raises concerns. Which concerns? Community payment flows are difficult to verify. We provided bank-matched transaction logs. Patients under financial stress can distort collection assumptions. Refund liability is separated and reserved. Social impact businesses often use mission to cover weak fundamentals. Our fundamentals are in the binder. Claudia closed it. She closed it before reading the page Renee had marked. Jonas sat forward. You have not reviewed the reconciliation. I have reviewed enough. Solomon asked, enough of the file or enough of me? The room stopped. Claudia leaned back. Mr. Greer, Merrill Kavanaugh will not accept this engagement. Solomon nodded once. What is the specific basis for refusal? Risk profile. Which risk? Founder credibility, customer sophistication, and potential revenue reliability issues. Jonas said, that is language, not evidence. Solomon asked, did you identify a false entry? No. An unmatched deposit? Not yet. A hidden liability. We have not completed review. Then what did you find? Claudia looked again at the customer slide, then back at Solomon. You are fraudulent. The word entered the room like a verdict without trial. Jonas stood. That is defamatory. Solomon lifted one hand. Sit, Jonas. Jonas sat because he trusted him. Renee stared at Claudia. She had watched the same partner soften real problems for wealthy clients. Potential misstatement became timing issue. Undisclosed liability became management representation pending. Revenue reversal risk became contract interpretation matter. Now Claudia was calling a clean file fraudulent without opening the support. Solomon asked, which number is false? Claudia answered, companies like yours always hide something. Solomon looked toward the glass wall. Two junior auditors looked away, too late. Are you sure you want that sentence in the meeting record? Claudia smiled. A founder begging for an audit is not in a position to threaten the audit firm. I am not threatening you. Then what are you doing? Preserving context. Claudia turned to Renee. Draft a refusal memo. Potential fraud risk. Founder credibility concern. We decline engagement. Renee did not type. Claudia looked at her. Now. Renee's hands moved slowly. Solomon said, I want the record to reflect that Merrill Kavanaugh has not identified a single false entry, unmatched bank deposit, hidden liability, customer fabrication, unsupported revenue item, or unexplained cash movement in the clear ledger package. Claudia said, you do not control our internal record. No, but if your internal record damages my company, it had better be attached to evidence. Claudia laughed softly. Aggressive founder profile. Asking for evidence is not aggression, Jonas said. Claudia looked at Jonas. You may want to advise your founder to be careful. Solomon closed his laptop. My chief financial officer does not advise me to shrink when someone misuses professional language. Renee looked up. The sentence reached her. Solomon stood. Please send the engagement refusal and any external risk communication to Selena Duarte, our counsel. Claudia said, we will not communicate with your lawyer unless required. You will be. Mr. Greer, I think you overestimate your position. Solomon picked up his father folder. No, I think you underestimated the record. At 9:32, Solomon and Jonas left conference room 12. Behind them, Claudia turned to Renee. Do not leave the draft notes saying clean. They conflict with the conclusion. Renee looked at the screen. But the bank reconciliation tied. Preliminary review is not conclusion, and the conclusion is fraud risk. Based on what evidence? Claudia stared at her. Do you want to work in audit, or do you want to write love letters to founders with sob stories? Renee looked down. Clean up the work paper, Claudia said. Remove no exception noted from the first pass. Replace it with further inquiry required. Do not circulate the original draft. Renee's hands went cold. She had heard versions of that instruction before, but never so openly. She had seen a software company recognize revenue months too early, only for Claudia to call it timing flexibility. She had seen a health equipment client hide customer refunds, only for Claudia to write management representation pending. She had seen a logistics client carry vendor debt outside the main reporting package, only for Claudia to call it classification judgment. But Clear Ledger was different. The first pass tied. The controls were strong. The deposits matched. And Claudia still wanted the word fraud to hover over the founder like smoke without fire. Renee saved the original draft. Then she saved the metadata. Then she copied the revision log into the protected folder she had created months earlier and had been too afraid to use. At 9:36, Solomon stepped into the elevator. Jonas was still angry. We should sue them today, not first. She called you fraudulent in front of staff. Yes. She tried to poison investor diligence. Yes. And you are calm. Solomon watched the elevator numbers fall. I am not calm. I am disciplined. In the lobby, Solomon called Selena Duarte. She answered on the first ring. Tell me. She said it. The exact word. Yes, fraudulent. Then companies like yours always hide something. Was it recorded? Meeting room transcript, Jonas notes. Renee heard it. Junior auditors heard part of it. Did they identify any actual misstatement? No. Did they create a fraud risk memo? Claudia ordered Renee to draft one. Selena exhaled. Grant Holloway needs to know now. Solomon looked back at the tower. How close is the order? Close enough that this matters. Selena said, We do this by process. No public accusation from you, no emotional post, no investor blast. We send the meeting record, Jonas notes, and the refusal language. Grant decides next step. Right evidence, right channel. Exactly. Solomon looked at the old folder under his arm. Then, activate the process. At 9:42, Selena transmitted the summary to Grant Holloway at the Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division. At 9:44, Jonas uploaded the meeting notes and document list. At 9:47, Renee sent one protected message from inside Merrill Kavanaugh. Subject: Clear Ledger Work Paper Alteration Request. Attached were the first pass notes, the revised draft, the metadata, and Claudia instruction to clean up the work paper. Grant Holloway read all three records within 6 minutes. He had been building the Merrill Kavanaugh case for months. Audit work papers edited after sign-off. Consulting fees routed through related accounts. Revenue issues softened for wealthy clients. Small founders flagged as fraud risks without evidence. The missing piece had been live intent, a current example. A clean file treated as suspicious because the founder did not belong to the class of client the firm preferred to protect. Now he had it. At 9:54, Grant called Selena. Is your client still in the building? Lobby. Tell him to leave and preserve all communications. Are you moving today? Grant's voice was calm. We are already moving. Selena called Solomon. Leave the building. How long? Grant says now. Solomon stepped onto the sidewalk with Jonas beside him. Then Jonas' phone buzzed. An investor text. Just heard Merrow passed. What happened? Should we be concerned? Jonas showed Solomon. Do not answer yet, Solomon said. Their lie gets ahead if we wait. No, their lie gets ahead if we fight dirty, because someone fought dirty first. We answer with records. Jonas nodded slowly. Solomon looked back at the tower. Inside that building, Claudia Merrow was still sitting beside a binder she had not truly opened. But the hour had started. And the audit firm that called him fraudulent was about to discover that the cleanest file in the room was not the one under investigation. It was the one they had rejected. At 9:58, Solomon Greer stood on the sidewalk outside Merrow Kavanaugh with his father folder under one arm and Jonas Bellwether beside him. The tower rose behind them like a polished instrument for turning reputation into money. Inside it, Claudia Merrow still believed she had ended a meeting. Outside it, Solomon knew the meeting had only begun. Jonas' phone buzzed again, another investor, then a clinic partner, then a message from a board observer. Word was already moving through the quiet channels where reputations are damaged before facts can catch up. Merrow declined. Should we pause diligence? Solomon read the message once. Do not answer yet, he said. Jonas looked at him. They are going to poison the round. Only if we let them make our records look emotional. You heard what she said. I heard every word. Then why are you not angry? Solomon looked through the tower glass at the lobby security desk. I am angry, but anger is not a filing system. Jonas stopped. That was why he worked for Solomon, not because Solomon never felt anything, because he never let the feeling become the record. Selena Duarte called again at 10:02. Grant Holloway has the package, she said. He wants all Clear Ledger communications preserved from the first outreach to Merrow Kavanaugh until now. Already done, Solomon said. Every email, yes. Every calendar invite, yes. Every deck version, yes. Every file sent to them, original export, hash record, upload receipt, access log, and delivery confirmation. Selena paused. Of course, you have all of that. Jonas muttered, he has receipts for receipts. Solomon almost smiled. Selena continued, do not speak publicly. Do not threaten. Do not contact Claudia. Do not correct rumors one by one. We will prepare a controlled investor update after Grant confirms what can be said. Solomon looked at Jonas. Understood. And Solomon? Yes. I know what she called you. He said nothing. Selena's voice softened. Do not let her make you prove your dignity by performing pain. Solomon closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. Right evidence, right channel. Right evidence, right channel, Selena repeated. The call ended. Jonas looked at him. Your father used to say that. No, Solomon looked at the old folder. My father used to say a wrong number could rob a poor man faster than a thief. The rest I learned because he was right. He opened the folder for a moment. Inside was not a business plan. It was a copy of the hospital letter that had arrived 7 years too late. Dear Mr. Greer, upon review, we have determined that a billing adjustment was applied incorrectly to your account. We regret any inconvenience. Any inconvenience. Those 2 words had taught Solomon more about finance than any lecture. The error had cost Isaac Greer his credit, his home, and years of being treated like a man who did not pay what he owed. When Solomon was 16, he watched his father stand at a payment counter with a folder of proof, while a clerk said the account had already been sold to collections. The clerk did not shout. That was part of the cruelty. Systems rarely need to shout when they have already decided a poor man is wrong. Isaac drove home without speaking. That night, Solomon found him at the kitchen table, staring at a bill that was not supposed to exist anymore. "I kept every receipt," Isaac said. "I know." "Every payment." "I know." "Every call reference number." Solomon remembered his father hand-pressing flat on the table. A man should not need a courtroom education to prove a number is lying. That sentence became the first idea behind Clear Ledger. Not an application, not a platform. A promise that the person with the least power would not be the one forced to remember everything alone. Years later, after studying finance, payment systems, and internal controls, Solomon built Clear Ledger HealthPay around one principle. Every financial claim needed a path. A charge needed an origin. A payment needed a confirmation. A refund needed a reserve. A dispute needed a status. An adjustment needed a user, a reason, a time, and a record that could not quietly disappear. The first clinics did not trust him quickly. They had heard promises from billing vendors before. Some software made invoices prettier while hiding the same confusion underneath. Solomon visited community clinics in person. He sat with office managers who worked through lunch. He listened to patients who brought envelopes full of bills they did not understand. He watched one grandmother ask whether paying for medicine meant missing rent. At a clinic in Baltimore, a receptionist named Maura Webb pointed at a pile of disputed invoices and said, "People think poor patients do not want to pay. Most of them just want to know what is real." Solomon wrote that down. What is real? That became the first Clear Ledger design test. If a patient could not understand why a charge existed within 3 clicks, the screen failed. If a clinic could not trace a payment to a bank deposit, the ledger failed. If an administrator could change an adjustment without leaving a trail, the control failed. Jonas joined 1 year later. He was not moved by speeches. He was moved by schedules that tied. The first time he reviewed Clear Ledger revenue, he asked Solomon for processor exports. Solomon gave them. Then bank statements. Solomon gave them. Then customer contracts. Solomon gave them. Then refund reports. Solomon gave them. Then exceptions. Solomon gave him a folder. Jonas spent 3 days trying to find the gap. On the 4th day, he said, "Your finance system is annoying." Solomon asked, "Is that good?" "It is excellent. Bad records make it easy to hide. Yours make it hard to breathe." "You want the job?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I am tired of companies with clean missions and messy books." You might actually have both the mission and the books. That was how Jonas became Chief Financial Officer. He made the system even stricter. Monthly close checklist. Dual approval on manual adjustments. Bank reconciliation locked after review. Escrow funds separated. Clinic contract renewal tied to ledger recognition. Refund liability reviewed by account, not guessed as a percentage to make margins look better. No hidden related party transactions. No unexplained cash movement. No revenue recognized before service obligation. No social mission used as an excuse for soft finance. That was the irony Claudia had refused to see. Clear Ledger was built by a man who feared false numbers more than almost anything. And she had called him fraudulent before reading them. At 10:11, Solomon and Jonas reached Clear Ledger headquarters. It was not a luxury office. 1 floor above a pharmacy, 2 blocks from the first clinic that had used the platform. The door opened into a working space with monitors, support tickets, compliance binders, and a wall where clinic thank you cards sat beside system uptime charts. People looked up when Solomon entered. They already knew something had happened. His operations director, Layla Benton, approached. "Is the audit firm out?" "Yes." "Should I worry?" "Not about our records." That answer did not comfort everyone. It clarified the fight. Solomon gathered the senior team in the small conference room. "No panic statements," he said. "No social media. No investor calls outside the prepared channel. Preserve everything related to Merrow Kavanaugh, every email, every uploaded file, every calendar invite, every note. If anyone gets a question, send it to Selena. Layla asked, "Did they find something?" "No." "Then why did they reject us?" Solomon did not answer immediately. "Because some people treat our customers as a risk factor before they treat them as people." The room went quiet. He continued, "That does not change our books. It changes how careful we have to be." A customer success manager asked, "Are we still raising?" "Yes." "Are investors going to believe them?" Solomon looked at the team. "They might believe smoke until we show there is no fire. That is why every record matters." He turned to Jonas. "Start the investor evidence package. Not defensive, factual. Timeline, submitted audit materials, bank tie-out, customer contract list, internal control summary, counsel note that independent audit process continues." Jonas nodded. "Already drafting." Layla asked, "What do we tell clinics?" "Nothing unless asked. Their service is not affected. Their payments are safe. Their patient funds remain segregated." One engineer raised his hand. "Do we need to lock platform access?" No outside access was granted to Merrow beyond uploaded read-only files. "Confirm logs anyway." The engineer nodded. "On it." Solomon saw fear in the room, not loud fear, professional fear. People had rent, children, student loans, parents, medical bills, and pride tied to ClearLedger. Claudia had not only insulted him, she had placed a shadow over everyone who trusted the company. He needed them to feel the truth, without pretending the risk was small. He said, "I will not tell you this is nothing. A large audit firm can damage a company by whispering before the company can respond. But our protection is the same thing our product promises patients. We do not argue with shadows. We show the path." At 10:24, the team began preserving. By 10:31, Jonas had the first investor evidence packet outline. By 10:36, Layla confirmed no Merrow Kavanaugh user had accessed the live platform. By 10:40, Selena sent the legal preservation memo. At the same time, inside Merrow Kavanaugh, Renee Halston sat at her desk with the first draft work paper open. ClearLedger Health Pay, first pass review. Revenue schedule ties to bank deposits. Customer contracts complete for sample period. Refund liability separately tracked. Escrow account documentation complete. No exception noted in preliminary reconciliation. She stared at the final sentence. No exception noted. Claudia wanted it removed. Renee had started in audit because she believed numbers could protect people from charm. A charming founder could lie. A famous client could lie. A generous fee could lie. But a proper audit was supposed to make the lie work harder. Under Claudia, she had learned a different profession, the profession of softening. A health equipment company had booked revenue before products shipped. Renee wrote potential misstatement. Claudia changed it to timing issue. A software company counted trial users as paying customers in an investor deck. Renee wrote revenue reversal risk. Claudia changed it to contract interpretation matter. A logistics company hid debt through vendor-side letters. Renee wrote undisclosed liability concern. Claudia changed it to management representation pending. Each time, Claudia said the same thing. Do not be naive. Do not overstate. Do not upset the client before materiality is established. But materiality always seemed flexible when the client was rich. It became sharp only when the founder was small. Renee opened her protected folder. For months, she had saved drafts, metadata, and instructions. She had not sent them because fear had a way of sounding reasonable. You need your license. You need your job. You need references. You need to be careful. Now the fear had another voice. If you stay silent, Claudia will use your work paper to harm the one clean file on your desk. Renee clicked send. The protected portal confirmed receipt. At 10:43, Grant Holloway received the Renee package. At 10:45, he connected it to the existing case map.
Merrow Kavanaugh had already been under investigation because too many public-facing filings had the same scent.
Financial statements later corrected. Audit work papers updated after sign-off. Consulting fees routed through related accounts. Revenue recognition issues softened before investor presentations. Multiple clients with real financial problems receiving gentle language. Multiple smaller companies receiving harsh risk labels without documented misstatement. The enforcement team had patterns. Patterns needed moments. The Clear Ledger meeting gave them one. A clean file, a biased accusation, a work paper alteration request, a refusal memo that could damage a company without evidence, a live instruction to remove a clean first pass. Grant turned to his deputy. Where are we on emergency relief? Ready for supervisory approval? Freeze scope. Certain firm-related accounts tied to suspect consulting fee flows. Audit data preservation across named engagements. Temporary suspension from participation in selected investor filings while records are secured. Clear Ledger, not the target. Witness company, preserve their package. Grant nodded. And Claudia. Interview notice after execution. No warning before system lock. At 10:52, the enforcement team moved. Solomon did not know the exact minute. He only knew the silence before a large institution acts. It felt different from waiting. Waiting was empty. This was loaded. He stood in his office, looking at a framed photograph of his father outside the old house they had lost. Isaac was smiling in the photograph, not because life had been easy, because dignity had survived a place that tried to make him feel foolish for believing documents mattered. Solomon's phone buzzed. Selena. Grant says remain available. Do not leave the office without telling me. Solomon asked, Is it happening? Selena said, It is underway. He looked through the glass at his team building the evidence packet. No cheers, no dramatic speech, no celebration. Good. A company that serves people hurt by financial confusion should not celebrate another institution being opened by investigators. It should understand the weight. At 11:01, Jonas entered Solomon's office. Investor packet ready for review. Solomon read the first page. Clear Ledger Health Pay Audit Engagement Timeline. Date of outreach. Material submitted. Meeting attendees. Questions asked. No misstatement identified. Engagement declined. Risk language requested by Merrow Kavanaugh. Counsel preservation notice. Solomon nodded. Remove adjectives. Jonas frowned. There are almost no adjectives. Remove almost. Jonas looked at him. You really are impossible. Today, yes. Jonas sat across from him. Can I say something not for the packet? Yes. She did not only attack the company. I know. She attacked you. I know. You are allowed to say that hurt. Solomon leaned back. For a moment, the chief executive officer disappeared, and the sun remained. It did hurt. Why not say that to the team? Because they need direction first, pain later. Jonas said, You always do that. Do what? Turn yourself into procedure. Solomon looked at the old folder. Someone has to. No, Jonas said. The company needs procedure. You are allowed to be a person inside it. Solomon did not answer. Outside, Layla was explaining preservation steps to the support team. An engineer was verifying access logs. A finance analyst was checking customer contract samples for the third time. Everyone was carrying a piece of the insult now. That was what made it hard. Claudia had used one sentence on one man, but the shadow touched a company built by dozens of careful people. At 11:10, Solomon opened a blank note to the team. He wrote one line. "Our books do not become weaker because someone refused to read them." Then he stopped. It sounded good. Too good. He deleted it. He wrote again. "Today may become noisy. Stay with the records. Do not improvise. Do not panic. Every patient account, clinic payment, and customer fund remains protected. We will respond through evidence and counsel." He sent it. Within seconds, reactions appeared. Not applause. Acknowledgement. People returned to work. That was the culture Solomon wanted. Not blind confidence. Disciplined trust. At 11:18, a news alert appeared on Jonas' second monitor. He froze. "Solomon," he said. The room went still. Jonas turned the monitor. "Securities and Exchange Commission announces emergency action involving Merrow Kavanaugh." No one spoke. The alert continued. Certain firm-related accounts frozen. Audit data preservation ordered. Selected filing participation suspended pending review. Investigation includes audit independence, securities fraud concerns, work paper alteration, and misrepresentation risk. Layla covered her mouth. A junior analyst whispered, "That is them." Solomon did not move. The promise from the conference room had arrived. 1 hour. Jonas looked at him. "What do we do now?" Solomon looked at the team. "The same thing we were doing before the headline. Preserve, verify, serve customers. Let counsel speak." But inside Merrow Kavanaugh, the headline landed like a door being kicked open without a raised voice. Claudia was in her office when the alert crossed the firm's system. For a moment, she thought it was a rumor. Then the compliance screen locked. Then the document management system displayed a preservation banner. Then a firm-wide message appeared. All personnel must preserve audit work papers, email, client communications, metadata, and engagement records. Do not delete, alter, move, or rename files. Renee stood at her desk. The first pass clear ledger work paper was still open. No exception noted in preliminary reconciliation. This time, she did not close it. Claudia stepped out of her office. "Renee?" "Yes?" "What did you send?" Renee's heart raced. The truth. Claudia's face changed. Before she could speak again, the elevator doors opened. Grant Holloway entered with an enforcement team and digital preservation specialists. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He held a folder, a tablet, and the authority of a process already underway. "Claudia Merrow," he said, "I am Grant Holloway with the Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division. We are here to serve an emergency preservation and enforcement order." Claudia looked around at the frozen screens, the silent auditors, the locked document system, and Renee standing beside the work paper she had been told to clean up. "This is a misunderstanding," Claudia said. Grant looked at the clear ledger binder, still visible through the conference room glass. "No," he said. "This is an audit." Grant Holloway did not raise his voice. That made the office listen harder. He stood near the glass entrance of Merrow Kavanaugh with 2 enforcement attorneys, 3 digital preservation specialists, and a court-authorized preservation order in his hand. Claudia Merrow stood outside her office, still trying to look inconvenienced instead of afraid. Behind her, the firm document system had locked. Across the audit floor, every screen showed the same warning. Do not delete, do not alter, do not rename, do not move files. Preserve all audit work papers, client communications, metadata, engagement notes, and internal review records. For most of the staff, the order felt sudden. For Renee Halston, it felt overdue. She stood beside her desk with the first pass clear ledger work paper still open. Revenue schedule ties to bank deposits. Customer contracts complete for sample period. Escrow account documentation complete. No exception noted in preliminary reconciliation. The line Claudia wanted removed was still visible. No exception noted. Grant looked through the glass wall at the conference room where the clear ledger binders still sat untouched.
Miss Merrow, we need immediate access to the Clear Ledger Health Pay intake folder, refusal memo draft, revision history, risk designation notes, and all communications with Solomon Greer.
Claudia lifted her chin. Clear Ledger is not an engagement. We declined the work. Grant answered. Then the declined work should be simple to preserve. A few auditors looked down. Claudia said, "This is a reputational attack on an independent audit firm. Independent audit firms are not harmed by preserving documents," Grant said. He turned to his team. "Begin system image." Claudia stepped forward. "You cannot seize privileged work product without protocol." Grant looked at her. "Privilege review can happen. Alteration cannot." Renee heard the difference. Claudia tried to make the issue sound like access. Grant made it about preservation. That was how truth entered professional rooms, not by shouting, by separating what people feared from what the law required.
At Clear Ledger Health Pay, Solomon Greer watched the same news alert move across 3 phones and 2 monitors. Securities and Exchange Commission announces emergency action involving Merrow Kavanaugh. Certain firm-related accounts frozen. Audit data preservation ordered. Selected investor filing participation suspended pending review. Investigation includes audit independence, securities fraud concerns, work paper alteration, and misrepresentation risk. The office was silent. Nobody cheered. Layla Benton stood in Solomon's doorway. So it is real. It was real before the headline, Solomon said. Jonas Bellwether said, "Investors are going to call all day." Then we answer once. With what? Facts. No victory lap. No accusation beyond what counsel approves. Clear Ledger is not the subject of the action. Customer funds are protected. Operations are normal. Our independent audit process continues with another qualified firm. Jonas nodded. "And what about Claudia calling you fraudulent?" Solomon looked at his father-old folder. That goes in the timeline, not the headline. At Merrow Kavanaugh, Grant team opened the Clear Ledger intake folder. One specialist read the file list aloud. Initial client inquiry, uploaded audit package receipt, meeting agenda, first pass review, refusal memo draft, fraud risk designation draft, founder credibility note, revision history. Grant looked at Claudia. "Open the founder credibility note." The document appeared on the conference room screen. Clear Ledger Health Pay intake concern, founder credibility risk, community market instability, potential fraud profile, aggressive growth narrative. No documented misstatement identified. Grant read the last line twice. No documented misstatement identified. Then he looked at Claudia. "You marked potential fraud profile while recording no documented misstatement." "Fraud risk can exist before misstatement is proven," Claudia replied. "Correct. What facts supported it here?" Solomon background. Market structure. Customer sophistication. Growth claims. Grant looked down at the binder. Did the bank activity tie to revenue? Preliminary review was incomplete. That was not my question. Renee answered before fear could stop her. "Yes." Claudia turned. "Renee?" Grant looked at Renee. "Miss Halston, did the initial bank activity tie to the revenue schedule?" "Yes." "Did you identify an unmatched deposit?" "No." "Hidden liability?" "No." "Unsupported customer contracts?" "No." "Unexplained cash movement?" "No." Grant turned back to Claudia.
Then what made founder credibility risk professional rather than personal? Claudia's face hardened. I will not allow my manager to be interrogated without firm counsel. Firm counsel has been notified, Grant said. Formal testimony can wait. The record cannot. He looked back at Renee. Did anyone instruct you to change the first pass work paper? Claudia said, Do not answer. Grant looked at her. That instruction is now noted. The room felt colder. Claudia had turned another command into a record. Renee said, Yes. Who instructed you? Miss Merrow? What did she say? Renee's hands shook once, then steadied. She told me to remove, no exception noted, because it conflicted with the conclusion. She told me to replace it with further inquiry required, and not circulate the original draft. Claudia said, That is a mischaracterization. Renee looked at her. You said, make it fit the conclusion. The words entered the room like a missing line in a ledger. Make it fit the conclusion. Grant asked the digital specialist, Do we have the metadata? Yes. Display it. The first pass document appeared with timestamps. Created at 9:06 in the morning. Saved before Claudia review at 9:26. Revision request entered at 9:36. Edited version created at 9:41. Grant asked, When did Solomon Greer leave the building? A specialist checked the visitor log. 9:34. Grant looked at Claudia. The revision request came after he left, after the first pass recorded no exception, and after no documented misstatement had been found. Claudia said, That is not what the timeline means. Grant replied, Then preserve the timeline and explain it later. On the audit floor, a junior auditor named Miles Carver stood near the printer with one page in his hand. Grant noticed him. Mr. Carver, do you have a document connected to ClearLedger? Miles looked at Claudia. Her eyes told him not to move. Grant said, If you possess responsive material, preserve it now. Miles stepped forward. I printed the refusal memo before it changed. Claudia's voice sharpened. Miles? He flinched. Grant said, Do not threaten staff. I said his name. In this room, tone is also context. Miles placed the page on the table. The first memo did not say fraud risk. It said capacity conflict and file appears complete. The first memo appeared beside the second. First version, capacity conflict. File appears complete. Further review possible. Final version. Potential fraud risk. Founder credibility concern. Community market instability. Grant looked at both. Same company, same morning, same records. Different conclusion. Claudia said, Intake judgment evolved. Grant answered, Evidence usually evolves after review, not after insult. At ClearLedger, Selena Duarte joined the leadership call. Solomon, the investor update is approved with limited language. Jonas opened the draft. ClearLedger HealthPay is aware of the public action involving Merrow Kavanaugh. ClearLedger is not the subject of that action. ClearLedger has preserved all communications, financial records, and audit materials connected to its outreach to Merrow Kavanaugh. Customer funds remain segregated. Operations are normal. ClearLedger will continue its independent audit process with a separate qualified firm. Solomon read it. Add one sentence. Which one? We welcome fair audit scrutiny based on data. Selena paused. Approved. The update went out. No adjectives, no victory language, no rage. Within minutes, investors replied, Thank you for clarity. Please send data room access. We remain engaged. Jonas showed Solomon the messages. That is good, Solomon said. It is stable. Good comes later. Back inside Merrow Kavanaugh, Grant expanded beyond ClearLedger. The preservation order identified several named engagements: Northbridge Medical Systems, Lydian Freight Technologies, Aurora Cloudworks, Pelham Asset Strategies. Renee knew all four. Northbridge had recognized revenue before product delivery. Lydian had vendor debt moved into side letters. Aurora had counted trial accounts as paying users. Pelham had valued illiquid assets as if buyers already existed. In every file, staff had written warnings. In every file, Claudia, or another senior partner, softened them. Grant opened Northbridge. Original staff note, potential revenue misstatement, partner revision. Timing issue subject to management representation. He opened Lydian. Original staff note, unrecorded vendor liability concern, partner revision, classification judgment. He opened Aurora. Original staff note, user count does not support paid revenue claim, partner revision, metric presentation difference. He opened Pelham. Original staff note, asset valuation lacks observable market support, partner revision, management estimate within range. Grant looked at Claudia. These are not isolated language preferences. Claudia said, "You are cherry-picking." Grant turned to the specialist. "Open the fee schedule." A spreadsheet appeared. Audit fees, consulting fees, related advisory fees, success-based consulting arrangements routed through affiliated accounts. Grant said, several audit clients also paid advisory fees through structures connected to firm partners. Claudia said, advisory relationships are disclosed where required. Are they disclosed in the work papers? I would need to review. You will have the opportunity. Today, we preserve. Claudia tried one more path. Clear ledger is a distraction. You are letting a founder with a grievance influence a federal enforcement action. Grant's expression did not change. Clear ledger did not create the Northbridge work paper. Clear ledger did not edit the Lydian side letter note. Clear ledger did not soften Aurora user count warnings. Clear ledger did not route advisory fees. He looked toward the binder. Clear ledger brought a clean file into your intake process and was labeled fraud risk without a documented misstatement. That makes the company a comparison point. Comparison point. Renee felt the phrase settle over the room. That was what Claudia had feared. Not one accusation, a comparison. How did Merrow Kavanaugh treat powerful clients with weak records? How did it treat a black founder with clean ones? The answer was becoming visible. At 12:10, Everett Kavanaugh, the managing partner, arrived with firm counsel. He moved quickly, but not confidently.
Grant, we will cooperate fully.
Good, Grant said. Everett looked at Claudia. Say nothing further without counsel. Then he looked at Renee. Miss Halston, you may have counsel as well. Renee said, I want independent counsel. The audit floor heard that. Everett blinked. Of course. Claudia stared at Renee as if betrayal had become official. Renee did not apologize. Not to Claudia. Grant handed Everett the order summary. Certain firm-related accounts are frozen because of suspected improper consulting fee flows tied to audit clients. Named audit data is sealed for preservation. Merrow Kavanaugh is temporarily suspended from participation in selected investor-facing filings while records are secured and reviewed. Everett swallowed. The firm cannot function under that shadow. Investor markets cannot function under unreliable audits, Grant said. That sentence traveled across the floor. Every auditor heard the job reduced to its real purpose. Reliable audits, not client comfort. Not partner revenue, reliable audits. At 1:15, Solomon joined a call with Clear Ledger lead investor Martin Vale. Martin sounded cautious. Solomon, we are not withdrawing, but we need to understand whether Merrow Kavanaugh found any issue in your financials. They did not identify one. Can you provide support?
The data room is open. You have bank reconciliations, processor exports, customer contracts, refund liability reports, escrow confirmations, internal control logs, and the communication timeline. The public action may delay closing. I understand. You seem prepared. Solomon looked toward the clinic thank you cards on the wall. We built the company for people who cannot afford unclear numbers. If funding takes longer because we insist on clear records, we will endure that. Martin said, I respect that. Respect is helpful, Solomon said. Verification is better. After the call, Jonas said, That went well. It went, honestly. That is better.
At Merrow Kavanaugh, Grant returned to the Clear Ledger fraud risk memo. Claudia now sat with counsel. Renee sat with independent counsel. Grant asked, Miss Halston, did Solomon Greer provide complete first-pass support? Yes. Was his file more complete or less complete than a typical intake client? More complete. Did you tell Miss Merrow that? Yes. What did she say? Renee looked at counsel. Counsel nodded. She said companies serving communities like that often use emotion to cover weak numbers. Grant asked, did she use the same immediate suspicion with wealthy clients whose records were weaker? Renee closed her eyes for half a second. No. Claudia stared at her. Renee opened her eyes. No, she repeated. At 3:30, Grant issued the internal preservation expansion. All Clear Ledger intake materials, all decline memos, all client risk designation logs for 5 years. All work paper revisions involving revenue recognition, undisclosed liabilities, refund obligations, and related advisory fee clients. All staff drafts where risk language changed after partner review. The order moved through the firm like water, finding every crack. People who had stayed quiet began searching old folders. Miles sent the original memo. A senior analyst sent revenue concern revisions. A former manager sent a message through counsel. I have draft comparisons from Northbridge and Aurora. By 4 o'clock, the case was no longer only Claudia. It was becoming the firm. At 4:15, Claudia requested a monitored call with Solomon through counsel. Selena asked if he was willing. Solomon looked at Jonas. Jonas shook his head. Solomon thought of his father at the payment counter, holding proof nobody wanted to read. He would not beg Claudia for dignity, but he would let the record hear her. One monitored call, Solomon said. Counsel present, recorded. 5 minutes. At 4:30, Claudia appeared on screen with her lawyer beside her. Solomon sat with Selena and Jonas. Mr. Greer, Claudia said, I want to clarify that my earlier language was not intended as a personal attack. Solomon waited. Had I known your company was already communicating with the Securities and Exchange Commission, I would have handled the discussion differently. Solomon looked at Selena, then back at Claudia. That is not an apology. That is a confession. Claudia frowned. Excuse me. You are saying you would have treated me fairly if you knew I had power behind me? That is not what I meant. It is what you said. Claudia's voice tightened. I was protecting my firm from risk. No, you were protecting your assumptions from data. She looked away. Solomon continued. You called me fraudulent without identifying one false number. You ordered a fraud risk memo without a misstatement. You told your manager to remove the clean first pass because it conflicted with your conclusion. Professional judgment, Claudia said. Professional judgment begins with evidence. Yours began with who you thought I was. Silence. Solomon picked up his father folder. My father lost a house because a wrong number became official before anyone cared enough to check it. I built Clear Ledger so people like him would not have to fight ghosts. This morning, you tried to turn my company into a ghost with a memo." Claudia had no answer. Solomon ended the call with one sentence. "We will speak through records now." The screen went dark. At 7:12 that evening, Grant sent Selena the first formal notice. Clear Ledger Health Pay was identified as a cooperating witness company, not a target. The Clear Ledger intake review would be preserved as evidence of differential treatment, work paper alteration risk, and possible misuse of fraud risk designations. Solomon read it twice. Jonas asked, "Should we tell the team?" "Tomorrow." "Why not now?" "Because tonight they should sleep." Jonas almost laughed. "You think they will? No. But I will not give them one more reason not to." Inside Merrow Kavanaugh, the investigation lights stayed on long after dark. Grant stood in the secured review room as the first preserved files came in. Clear Ledger, Northbridge, Lydian, Aurora, Pelham. He watched the comparison chart grow. Clean file, harsh label. Weak file, soft language. Small founder, fraud risk. Powerful client, judgment matter. He turned to his deputy. "Prepare the authority shift for tomorrow." The deputy looked up. "You want Claudia in the full review?" "Yes." "And Renee?" "Yes." "Clear Ledger representatives, through counsel." Grant looked at the chart. "Tomorrow, Miss Merrow gets to explain why the only company she called fraudulent is the one whose numbers tied." On the screen, the first pass note remained visible. No exception noted. For a line Claudia wanted erased, it had become very difficult to ignore. The words stayed on the secured review screen the next morning when Grant Holloway opened the full comparison session inside Merrow Kavanaugh. Claudia did not sit at the head of the table. She sat on the right side with counsel. Everett Kavanaugh, the managing partner, sat near the door with a face that looked calm only because panic would have been worse for the firm. Renee Halston sat across from Claudia, with independent counsel beside her. Solomon Greer appeared by secure video from Clear Ledger office, with Selena Duarte and Jonas Bellwether beside him. Grant stood at the front, with one screen behind him. "Today is not a trial," he said. "Today is a review of preserved records, risk designations, work paper revisions, and audit independence concerns." Claudia folded her hands. "Professional judgment can evolve." Grant nodded. "Professional judgment can evolve. Records can show whether it evolved from evidence or from preference." He turned to the screen. "Open Clear Ledger." The first panel appeared. Clear Ledger Health Pay, Initial Review. Revenue schedule tied to bank deposits. Customer contracts complete. Escrow documentation complete. Refund liability tracked separately. No hidden debt identified. No unexplained cash movement. No documented misstatement. Then the second panel appeared. Final intake note. Founder credibility concern. Community market instability. Potential fraud profile. Grant let the room read both. "Same file," he said, "same morning, same support." A clean first pass became a fraud concern after Miss Merrow closed the binder and called Mr. Greer fraudulent. Claudia said, "That is an unfair summary." Grant looked at Renee. "Miss Halston, did Miss Merrow review the full bank reconciliation before making that statement?" "No." "Did she review the contract sample?" "No." "Did she review the escrow documentation?" "No." "Did she ask for additional support?" "No." "What did she discuss before the conclusion? The customer base, the social mission, the founder background, and whether community clinics could really support the revenue." Grant turned to Claudia. "Those topics may be relevant in audit planning, but the record shows you treated them as proof before testing the numbers." Claudia's voice sharpened. I treated them as risk indicators. Then Grant clicked to the next file. Northbridge Medical Systems. The room shifted. Maribel Knox appeared on a second secure video screen. She was the chair of the audit committee at Northbridge, one of Merrow Cavanaugh's most valuable public company clients. Until that morning, she had believed Claudia was a strict auditor who protected investors. Now she was watching her own audit file opened by enforcement. Grant said, Northbridge recognized revenue on medical devices before delivery confirmation. Staff flagged it. The first note appeared. Potential revenue misstatement. Delivery obligation not completed for sampled contracts.
Then the partner revision appeared. Timing issue subject to management representation. Grant asked, Ms. Halston, who made the original note? I did. Who softened it? Miss Merrow. Claudia counsel said, objection to characterization. Grant replied, noted. The revision is on the screen. Maribel Knox leaned closer to her camera. I was told delivery timing had been fully resolved. Grant said, the preserved staff note suggests the issue was not resolved when the audit committee was briefed. Maribel went still. Claudia said, the final conclusion depended on additional context. Grant opened the context folder. There was no delivery confirmation, only a management representation letter. Grant asked, Miss Merrow, where is the independent delivery support? Claudia said, I would need time to review. Grant answered, you signed the audit work paper. Take the time now. Silence. For years, Claudia had used time as fog. Now, time was a spotlight. Grant moved to the next file. Lydian Freight Technologies. Original staff note. Unrecorded vendor liability concern. Side letters indicate payment obligations not included in main debt schedule. Partner revision. Classification judgment. Vendor credit structure subject to management representation. Grant opened the side letter. It showed payment obligations pushed outside the standard reporting package. Grant said, this is the second file where staff wrote a concrete concern and final language softened it into a judgment matter. Claudia said, you are ignoring materiality. Grant replied, materiality does not make a document vanish. It determines how the document affects the statement. The original concern still needed a clear audit trail. He turned to Renee. Were you instructed to remove stronger wording? In Lydian, yes. By whom? Miss Merrow. Grant continued. Aurora Cloudworks. The screen changed. Original staff note. Reported paying customers do not tie to billing records. Trial users appear included in paid user metric. Partner revision. Metric presentation difference. A second document appeared. Investor deck draft. Aurora presented those users as paying customers. Grant said, Aurora raised capital using a user count that your staff questioned. Claudia said, the metric was not part of the audited financial statements, but it was included in audit committee materials attached to the review file. Claudia did not answer. Grant opened Pelham Asset Strategies. Original staff note. Illiquid asset valuation lacks observable market support. Partner revision. Management estimate within acceptable range. Then he opened the related advisory fee schedule. Pelham had paid Merrow Cavanaugh related advisory fees through an affiliated consulting entity. Grant said, several named clients with softened audit language also paid additional advisory fees through firm-connected channels. Claudia said, those services were separate. Grant asked, were they disclosed in each audit independence review? Counsel spoke before she could. My client will not answer. Grant nodded. Then the record remains as preserved. The room was no longer discussing one insult. ClearLedger had opened the door, but behind it were years of files where powerful clients received soft words and weaker founders received sharp labels. Grant displayed the comparison chart. ClearLedger, no documented misstatement, potential fraud profile.
Northbridge, potential revenue misstatement, timing issue. Lydian, unrecorded liability concern, classification judgment. Aurora, user count does not tie, metric presentation difference. Pelham, unsupported valuation, management estimate. The chart did not need dramatic language. It was dramatic because it was plain. Solomon watched from the secure screen. Selina said quietly, "Let the chart work." Solomon nodded once. He had learned that when a wrong number is finally shown beside the right one, the room does not need shouting. It needs courage not to look away. Maribel Knox spoke from the Northbridge screen. "Miss Merrill, did you inform our audit committee that staff had identified possible revenue recognition problems tied to undelivered devices?" Claudia said, "We informed the committee that delivery timing had been assessed." "That is not what I asked." The room turned toward Maribel. "Did you inform us that staff used the phrase potential revenue misstatement before the language was changed?" Claudia did not answer. Grant said, "The audit committee minutes do not show that phrase." Maribel's face hardened. "Then our committee was not given the issue as staff identified it." Everett spoke quickly. "Miss Knox, the firm will review the full engagement and provide an appropriate response." Maribel looked at him. "No, Mr. Kavanaugh, your firm will preserve the full engagement and our company will retain independent review counsel." A powerful client had just stopped being protected and started becoming a witness. Grant turned back to Solomon video. "Mr. Greer, did Merrill Kavanaugh identify any documented misstatement in Clear Ledger materials during the intake meeting?" "No." "Did Ms. Merrill ask to continue testing before labeling the company fraud risk?" "No." "Did Clear Ledger provide the underlying bank and customer support?" "Yes." Jonas added, "Every requested item in the preliminary list was uploaded before the meeting. We have delivery receipts and access logs." Grant said, "Please preserve and provide those through counsel." "Already done," Selina said. Claudia looked at Solomon on the screen. "You came here to trap us." Solomon answered, "No, I came to see whether you would audit the numbers before judging the person who brought them." She said, "You were cooperating with enforcement before the meeting." "Yes." "Then this was not a normal intake." Solomon said, "Your work paper did not know that when it said, 'No exception noted.'" The room held the sentence. That was the difference Claudia could not escape. The numbers had spoken before the power was revealed. Grant asked Renee one more question. "Miss Halston, before Miss Merrow knew of any enforcement cooperation by Clear Ledger, what was your first professional assessment of the file?" Renee looked at Solomon on the screen. "Complete. Unusually complete." Claudia closed her eyes. Grant opened the emergency action order. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has frozen certain firm-related accounts tied to suspicious consulting fee flows. The Commission has also ordered preservation of audit work papers and suspended the firm from selected investor-facing filings while review continues." Everett said, "This suspension could collapse pending client transactions." Grant looked at him. "That is why audit integrity matters before filings are submitted, not after investors rely on them." Everett looked older. "What do you need from us now?" "Full preservation, independent review, no contact with witnesses except through counsel, no internal retaliation, no destruction of personal notes, no instructions to align work papers with conclusions." The last phrase landed directly on Claudia. Grant continued, "Miss Halston is a protected witness. Mr. Carver is a protected witness. Any staff member who preserved original drafts is protected from retaliation. Any attempt to discipline, isolate, threaten, or pressure them in connection with preserved records must be reported." Renee looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. But now the shaking had a place in the record. Miles Carver stood outside the room with two other junior auditors. He heard his name and almost cried from relief. Everett nodded.
The firm will comply. Grant said, compliance will be measured by records, not statements. At ClearLedger, the investor calls continued, but the tone changed after the comparison review became known through counsel channels. One investor asked, "Are you worried being tied to this investigation will hurt your brand?" Solomon answered, "I am worried about any market where a clean file can be called fraud risk because the founder serves poor patients, while weak files from powerful clients are softened. If that hurts our brand, we are talking to the wrong investors." There was a pause. Then the investor said, "Send the data room link." Jonas muted the call for 1 second. That was good. Solomon shook his head. That was useful. At Merrow Kavanaugh, Grant team moved to Claudia personal review notes. Counsel objected to several items. Privilege protocol was established, but one non-privileged note had already been saved in the client acceptance file. ClearLedger, mission-driven financial technology company. High emotional appeal. Founder profile creates reputational exposure. Community clinic customers may lack financial sophistication. Consider protective decline. Grant displayed it beside the first pass work paper. No exception noted. Founder profile creates reputational exposure. He looked at Claudia. "What does founder profile mean?" Claudia counsel spoke. "My client will not answer." Grant nodded. Then the unanswered question remained on the screen. That was enough. Some phrases do not need confession once placed beside the facts. At 2:15, Everett removed Claudia from all active engagements pending internal review. It was not a moral awakening, it was institutional survival. But consequences do not always begin from courage. Sometimes they begin because records make cowardice expensive. Claudia stood. "You cannot do this in front of enforcement." Everett said, "I should have done it before enforcement entered the building." She looked around the room. Renee did not look away. Grant did not move. Solomon on the screen remained still. Claudia gathered her folder, but a digital specialist stepped forward. "That folder stays. It contains my personal notes." Grant said, "If it contains engagement notes, preserve first. Review later." Claudia hand tightened on the folder. For years, she had decided which notes survived. Now a stranger held out a preservation envelope. She placed the folder inside. The sound was soft. The meaning was not. At 3 o'clock, Maribel Knox convened an emergency Northbridge Audit Committee call. She invited independent counsel, a forensic accounting team, and Grant team through the proper channel. Northbridge would restate the revenue issue if required. It would notify investors if the audit committee determined prior disclosures were unreliable. It would review management representation letters. It would suspend any executive involved in providing incomplete delivery evidence. One director asked, "Are we overreacting because of an enforcement display?" Maribel answered, "We are reacting because our auditor did not show us what staff first wrote." That became the line that moved the committee, not the headline, the missing first words. Potential revenue misstatement. At 4:20, Grant team updated the comparison chart. One more column appeared. Who benefited from softened language? Northbridge, management and financing round. Lydian, debt covenant presentation. Aurora, investor growth story. Pelham, asset value reporting. Who was harmed by harsh language without misstatement? ClearLedger, founder reputation and funding round. Grant did not speak for almost 10 seconds. Then he said, "This is the core of the pattern." Claudia, lawyer, said, "The firm rejects that characterization." Grant answered, "The firm may reject it. The records may not." Renee looked at Solomon's screen. She had wanted to apologize again, but she understood now that apology was smaller than cooperation. She said, "There are more drafts." Grant turned. "Where?" "Archived review notes. Partner comments were exported before final sign-off. I can identify the folder path." Everett looked stunned. "You knew this and did not report it?" Renee looked at him. "I reported concerns inside the chain I was told to use. They went to the people now under review." Everett had no answer. Grant said, Provide the path through counsel. Renee nodded. The room shifted again, not because she had become fearless, because a protected witness with a folder path can move more power than a partner with a title. At 5:10, the first external consequence reached Merrow Cavanagh Client Services. 2 pending investor filings were paused. 1 public company requested independent re-audit consultation. 3 audit committees asked whether their work papers had been altered after staff review. A venture fund sent notice freezing new reliance on Merrow Cavanagh opinions until further review. Everett read each message as it arrived. By the 3rd one, he stopped calling it misunderstanding. At Clear Ledger, the team stayed late. Layla reported that clinic operations remained normal. No customer funds had moved. No patient accounts were affected. Jonas confirmed that the data room access logs were clean. Selena confirmed that Clear Ledger's status as a cooperating witness company could be shared under limited language with lead investors. Solomon gathered the team before they left. Today was not a victory, he said. Nobody smiled. A victory would have been an audit firm opening our file, reading our numbers, and applying the same standard it applied to everyone else. What happened today was necessary, but necessary is not the same as good. The room listened. We will continue the audit process. We will answer investors with records. We will protect clinics and patients. We will not become a company that needs chaos to feel important. A support analyst asked, "What about what she called you?" Solomon looked at the old folder on the table. That word is part of the record now. It does not get to become our identity. At 6:30, the review session at Merrow Cavanagh ended for the day. Grant closed the laptop. Preservation continues overnight. No one touches the named files without logged authorization. Counsel protocols remain active. Witness protections remain active. Claudia stood to leave with counsel. At the door, she looked back at the screen. The final chart was still visible. Clean file, harsh label. Weak file, soft language. She looked at Solomon on the secure screen. He had not left yet. For the first time, she did not look angry. She looked like someone seeing a mirror she could not turn away from. Solomon spoke before she could. "You called my company fraudulent before you opened the proof." Claudia said nothing. He continued, "Tomorrow, the market will ask whether your firm opened proof for anyone." Grant looked from Solomon to Claudia. That is the right question. The secure screen went dark. Claudia walked out with counsel. Renee remained seated. Miles stood outside with the original memo copy logged into evidence. Everett spoke quietly with firm counsel about suspension notices, client communications, and insurance exposure. Grant Holloway looked at the comparison chart one more time. Then he added a label to the next day review folder. Merrow Cavanagh, authority shift. Not because the government wanted theater, because the authority in the room had changed. The partner no longer decided what the file meant. The file did. And the founder they called fraudulent had brought the cleanest ledger in the building. By the next morning, that sentence had become the quiet truth nobody at Merrow Cavanagh wanted to say aloud. The firm did not collapse in one dramatic moment. It changed by notifications. One client paused a filing. Another requested independent review. A third asked whether its work papers had been altered after staff notes were written. A venture fund told its portfolio companies not to rely on Merrow Cavanagh opinions until the Securities and Exchange Commission review clarified the scope of the problem. Everett Cavanagh sent a message to all personnel before 8 in the morning. Full cooperation. No retaliation. All records preserved. Independent counsel appointed. Claudia Merrow removed from all active client matters. The message sounded firm. It also sounded late. Renee Halston read it at her desk with her own counsel on the phone. Miles Carver stood 2 rows away, pretending to sort paper while watching every partner who walked past him. For years, junior auditors had learned the same lesson without anyone saying it directly. A staff warning could be softened. A partner conclusion could become the truth. A client with money could turn a red flag gray. A small founder could be labeled dangerous before the numbers were opened. Now the office had to learn a different lesson. A draft was not nothing. A revision was not invisible. A line removed from a work paper could return with more force than the person who deleted it. At Clear Ledger HealthPay, Solomon Greer began the day by opening the patient support dashboard. Not the headlines, not the investor messages, the dashboard. 4,900 active repayment plans, 98% payment traceability, 0 customer funds commingled, 76 disputed charges resolved in the last 24 hours. Jonas Bellwether entered with 2 coffees. You are looking at the dashboard before the Securities and Exchange Commission update. Solomon accepted 1 cup. Patients did not stop needing clarity because Merrow Cavanagh got famous for the wrong reason. Jonas leaned against the door. Lead investors confirmed they remain engaged. They want the independent audit firm shortlist by noon. Good. Selena says the cooperating witness language can be shared in the data room, not in public marketing. Good. You are impossible to excite. Solomon looked at him. Excitement is not a control environment. Jonas laughed once. That might be the worst sentence you have ever said. But the laugh helped. For the first time since Claudia had said the word fraudulent, the air in the office loosened. Solomon gathered the team at 9. He did not stand on a stage. He stood beside the wall of clinic thank you cards, where patient names had been covered for privacy, but the gratitude remained visible in careful handwriting. Yesterday, he said, a powerful firm tried to attach a false risk to our company without identifying a false number. Today, we continue proving who we are, the same way we built this company, not by volume, not by revenge, by records. The team listened. Clear Ledger will hire another independent audit firm. They will review our revenue recognition, bank reconciliation, customer contracts, refund liabilities, escrow accounts, data integrity, and internal controls. If they find weaknesses, we will fix them. If they confirm strength, we will publish it properly. Layla Benton asked, "Are we going to tell the public what Claudia said?" Not as a campaign, but people should know what happened. They will, through the record, through counsel, through the investigation, and when the time is right, through a story that is useful to founders who may face the same thing. A young analyst asked, "What if the new auditors are harder on us because they are afraid of the headlines?" Solomon nodded. "Then we will give them the proof. Fair scrutiny is not our enemy." That became the sentence the team carried into the day. Fair scrutiny is not the enemy. At 10:30, Clear Ledger selected a smaller independent audit firm called Voss & Harrow. It did not have Merrow Cavanagh reputation, but it had a stricter intake process and no consulting relationship with Clear Ledger investors. The lead partner, Amara Voss, made the first call herself. "Mr. Greer, before we accept, I want to be clear. We will not audit you to prove Merrow Cavanagh wrong. We will audit you to determine whether your financial statements are fairly presented." Solomon said, "That is exactly what I want. We will ask hard questions. Good. We will test revenue, cash, contracts, refunds, escrow balances, related party activity, and control access. Good. If we find exceptions, we will report them. Good." Amara paused. Most founders do not answer good to that many warnings. Solomon looked at his father folder. "I built this company because hidden exceptions destroy people. Then we can begin." By noon, Voss & Harrow had access to a read-only data room. Jonas organized the first request list: bank statements, payment processor exports, clinic contracts, patient fund escrow confirmations, refund liability schedule, deferred revenue support, user access logs, manual adjustment report, control exception list, board minutes, investor materials, related party certification. Solomon watched the files move into order. This was what Claudia had refused to do. Open the numbers, follow the trail, ask the question before deciding the person. At Merrow Cavanagh, the Securities and Exchange Commission review moved in the opposite direction. It did not begin with trust, it began with preservation. Grant Holloway opened the next-day review with Everett, counsel, Renee, Miles, and a forensic accounting team. Claudia attended only through counsel. Her access to active work papers had been suspended. Grant displayed 5 file pairs. Clear ledger, clean support, harsh label. Northbridge, revenue problem, soft label. Lydian, hidden obligation, soft label. Aurora, user count problem, soft label. Pelham, valuation support missing, soft label. Then he added a 6th column, fees and influence. Northbridge had paid advisory fees through an affiliated consulting account. Pelham had paid valuation consulting fees to a partner-connected entity. Aurora had referred 2 major clients to Merrill Kavanaugh. Lydian had promised future public offering work. Clearledger had offered only an audit fee and a mission serving low-income patients. Grant said, "This review will determine whether audit skepticism was applied according to evidence or according to client power." Everett said, "We intend to cooperate." Grant replied, "Cooperation is not a sentence. It is a series of acts." Renee looked at the screen. She knew the series had begun because people who once corrected themselves in whispers were now sending old drafts through counsel. By the end of the week, 8 staff members had provided protected materials. A senior associate produced an email where Claudia wrote, "We do not need to inflame the audit committee with staff language." A former manager produced a Northbridge comparison showing the phrase potential revenue misstatement removed after a partner fee discussion.
Miles produced a clear ledger printout showing the first refusal memo before founder credibility concern appeared. Renee produced the folder paths for archived partner comment exports. Every item had to be reviewed. Not every item proved wrongdoing, but enough of them proved a pattern too serious to dismiss as style. Claudia tried to fight through statements. Her counsel sent a written explanation saying she had exercised professional skepticism in a difficult intake environment. It said Clearledger business model served financially vulnerable customers and therefore required enhanced caution. It said her language had been imprecise but not discriminatory. It said work paper revisions reflected normal professional judgment. Grant read the statement once. Then he placed it beside the record. No documented misstatement identified. Make it fit the conclusion. Founder profile creates reputational exposure. Companies like yours always hide something. The statement looked smaller beside the words Claudia had actually used. Solomon received a copy through Selena 2 days later. He read the line about financially vulnerable customers. Then he closed his eyes. Selena asked, "Do you want to respond?" "Not publicly, through counsel." "Say what?" "That serving financially vulnerable patients increases our duty to keep clean records. It does not create evidence of fraud." Selena nodded. "That is strong." "It is true." Weeks passed. The headlines moved from shock to process. Merrill Kavanaugh removed Claudia from partnership leadership. The firm appointed an outside ethics monitor. Professional responsibility authorities opened disciplinary review. Several audit committees hired independent forensic teams. The Securities and Exchange Commission continued reviewing whether the firm had violated independence rules, assisted misleading filings, or failed to preserve accurate work papers. Everett Kavanaugh appeared in a closed session before regulators and said the firm had relied too heavily on partner judgment. Grant answered, "Partner judgment is not a substitute for audit evidence." That sentence appeared later in more than one training presentation. Northbridge announced it would re-evaluate revenue recognition and notify investors if prior filings required correction. Lydian disclosed a review of vendor obligations. Aurora corrected its paid customer metric. Pelham suspended new valuation reports pending independent support. The clients Claudia had protected began facing the scrutiny she had delayed. Clearledger faced scrutiny too. That was Solomon's choice. Voss and Harrow tested the company for 6 weeks. They questioned revenue cutoff.
They challenged refund reserve assumptions. They sampled clinic contracts. They traced cash. They reviewed support tickets for billing disputes. They tested whether user access logs could be altered.
They asked why one small clinic payment had been delayed 3 times. Jonas answered with documents. Layla answered with customer records. Engineers answered with system logs. Solomon answered when the questions belonged to leadership. The auditors found issues, not fraud, not hidden debt, not fake customers. Issues. A refund reserve model needed clearer documentation for one clinic category. A manual adjustment approval had been logged by the right person, but lacked a written explanation in 2 cases. A board deck used the phrase recurring clinic revenue, where contracted recurring revenue would be more precise. Amara Voss presented the findings without softness. Solomon listened. Jonas listened. Nobody argued that mission made the issues smaller. Solomon said, "We will fix them before the report is final." Amara nodded. That is how this is supposed to work. The final audit opinion came 8 weeks after Claudia had closed the binder. Clear ledger financial statements were fairly presented in all material respects. The internal control letter included ordinary recommendations, clearer refund reserve documentation, stronger written support for manual adjustments, more precise investor wording, no fraud finding, no unexplained cash movement, no hidden debt, no customer fabrication. Solomon did not celebrate with champagne. He walked downstairs to the clinic on the corner. The waiting room was full. A mother at the front desk was asking why a bill had changed after insurance. The receptionist opened Clear Ledger and showed the line. Original charge, insurance adjustment, clinic discount, remaining payment plan. The mother stared at the screen. So this is the real number. Yes, and it will not change next week. Not unless something new is added. If it is, you will see who added it and why. The mother nodded slowly. For Solomon, that moment mattered more than the investor email that arrived an hour later. Second major growth round approved. Lead investors confirmed participation. Expansion into 3 additional states authorized. Capital reserved for clinic onboarding, patient support, and compliance infrastructure. Jonas found him outside the clinic. You saw the email? Yes. And you came down here? Yes. Why? Solomon looked through the clinic window. Because this is what the money is for. Jonas stood beside him. You know Claudia would hate that answer. That makes it better, Jonas said. This time, Solomon did smile. Renee Halston did not stay at Merrow Cavanagh. She cooperated through the investigation, gave testimony through counsel, and helped regulators understand how work paper language could be softened without obvious deletion. Months later, she accepted a role at an Audit Ethics Reform Institute. Her first training session was with junior auditors. She placed 2 sentences on the screen. No exception noted. Make it fit the conclusion. Then she faced the room. These 2 lines are the distance between auditing and serving power. A young auditor asked, "What if the partner says the language is too strong?" Renee answered, "Then ask what evidence made it too strong. If the answer is client sensitivity, reputation, or comfort, preserve the original wording and use the reporting channel." Another asked, "Were you afraid?" "Every day." "How did you speak anyway?" Renee looked down for a moment. "I waited too long. Do not make fear your only supervisor." At a public market integrity conference 1 year later, Solomon, Renee, Grant Holloway, and Maribel Knox sat on the same panel. The title behind them was simple: When Skepticism Becomes Bias. Grant spoke about enforcement. Maribel spoke about audit committees needing original staff concerns, not only partner summaries. Renee spoke about work papers as public trust, even when the public never sees them. Solomon spoke last. He did not tell the audience that Clearledger had defeated Merrow Cavanagh. That would have made the story too small. He said, the goal was never to avoid audit. The goal was to be audited by the same standard as everyone else. A founder in the audience raised his hand. If a major firm labels my company fraud risk without evidence, what should I do first? Solomon answered, do not answer rage with rage. Answer with records. Preserve contracts, preserve bank statements, preserve logs, preserve emails, preserve draft reports. Ask for the specific misstatement. Ask for the evidence. And do not let anyone turn the poverty of your customers into evidence against the truth of your company. The room stayed quiet after that. The sentence had found people who needed it. After the panel, Maribel approached Solomon. I owe you something. Solomon said, you do not owe me anything. I do. My committee trusted a brand more than a record. Your case made us ask for the first staff notes. That changed everything. Solomon nodded. Then keep asking for the first notes. Renee joined them. That should be a rule. Grant, standing nearby, said, in some rooms it may become one. They all understood the limits. One case did not purify a market. One order did not erase every biased assumption. One clean audit did not protect every founder. But it gave people a method. Ask for the number. Ask for the support. Ask who changed the wording. Ask who benefits when a red flag becomes a gray note. Ask why skepticism becomes sharp only when the person across the table has less power. At the end of the conference, Solomon stepped outside alone. He opened his father folder. The old hospital letter was still there. Dear Mr. Greer, upon review, we have determined that a billing adjustment was applied incorrectly to your account. We regret any inconvenience. The words were still cold, still late, still smaller than the harm. Solomon had once hated that letter because it proved his father had been right too late to matter. Now he saw something else in it.
A record can arrive too late. That is why some people spend their lives building systems that make the next record arrive in time. His phone buzzed. A message from the clinic on the corner. Patient dispute resolved. Billing error corrected before collections. Payment plan updated. Patient notified. Solomon read it twice. Then he looked up at the city. Somewhere inside it, a person would sleep that night without a false number growing teeth in the dark. That was the work, not the headline, not the revenge. The work. Claudia Merrow had believed she was only rejecting a black founder who did not fit her image of a safe client. She believed a company serving community clinics, low-income patients, and non-profit funds must be hiding weakness behind sympathy. She believed professional language could make prejudice sound like caution. She believed a fraud risk memo could damage Clearledger before Solomon found a room powerful enough to listen. But she had misunderstood the man across the table. Solomon Greer had not come asking to be trusted out of pity. He had come with bank statements, contracts, reconciliation, audit trails, counsel, witnesses, and a record that did not move when power leaned on it. The firm that called him fraudulent was frozen because its own records would not stay buried. The partner who refused to open his numbers had to watch investigators open hers. The company she tried to mark as suspicious passed an independent audit. And the customers she treated as a warning sign became the reason the truth mattered. Because financial dignity is not reserved for people with famous investors. Clean books are not less clean because the patients are poor. A founder is not fraudulent because he built for the forgotten. And professional skepticism is not a weapon to aim at the powerless while the powerful buy softer words. The last scene was not in a courtroom. It was not in an enforcement office. It was not in a tower with silver words on the wall. It was in a community clinic where an older man stood at a front desk, confused by a medical balance he feared he could not pay. The receptionist opened Clearledger. She showed him the charge, the insurance payment, the correction, the clinic discount, the remaining amount. The man looked at the screen. So that is all. That is all. No hidden fee. No hidden fee. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. I thought it was going to be worse. The receptionist said, "It was wrong before. Now it is fixed." Solomon stood near the hallway and heard the words, "Now it is fixed." He thought of his father. He thought of the house lost to a wrong number. He thought of Claudia closing the binder before reading the first page. Then he thought of every person who would never know his name, but would see a bill corrected before it became a wound. That was enough. A wrong number could rob a poor man faster than a thief, but the right record, preserved by the right people at the right time, could stop the theft before it learned to call itself professional judgment.